In 1990, Saddam Hussein sent tanks and troops into Kuwait, starting a war to steal their oil. In just 2 days, he grabbed control of the country and also 20% of the world's oil reserves. The world hit back. The United States and 34 other nations launched Operation Desert Storm, bombing Iraq for 38 days straight before launching a ground assault, forcing Saddam's soldiers back into Iraq. And as those soldiers fled along Highway 80 out of Kuwait City, coalition forces pounded the hell out of them. It became a massacre, burning thousands of lives on what was to become known as the Highway of Death. When the smoke cleared and the war ended, the Kuwaiti royal family returned to their palaces. George Bush was still in the White House as president, and Saddam Hussein remained in his own palaces, ruling Iraq for 12 more years. Around 300 coalition soldiers were killed, along with over 20 to 30,000 Iraqi soldiers, many of them teenage draftees who died for a war they didn't start, and the rulers went on with their lives. Since then, I could never shake the notion. Wouldn't it have been better, more efficient, more moral, to have just killed Saddam before it started? He'd been a murderous thug his whole life, so why didn't other world leaders assassinate him and not kill thousands of young Iraqis? But they didn't. Largely, they say, because it's illegal, both under US law and international norms. But should it be? The elephant in the room is this: why do we let warlike dictators live while sending young men to die instead? I'm Ken LaCourte. I dig into questions like this and try to bring you the research as straightforward as I can manage. And I'm not the only one who's thought about this, obviously. The whole concept of would you kill baby Hitler is a popular philosophical discussion. By the way, a poll in the United States showed that 42% of the people said yes to that, 30% said no, and 28% weren't sure. Okay, so why are political assassinations off the table? Here's what we're told. First, assassination is illegal. Second, it's often too hard to pull off. And third, it can backfire catastrophically. And all of those reasons have some truth to them. But when you just look a little beneath the surface, the rationale starts to fall apart a bit. Let's start with the illegal claim, at least for the United States. In 1976, President Ford issued an executive order banning US government employees from engaging in political assassinations. But here's the thing: executive orders can be changed with the stroke of a pen. They're not constitutional law, they're not treaties, they're presidential preferences dressed up in legal language. And while it sounds noble, we've built up an entire legal framework to get around the assassination ban. If you label someone a terrorist or a combatant in an ongoing conflict, they're fair game. As long as that target isn't wearing a presidential sash, presidents could find a way to justify the hit. And then there's reason number two: it's too hard. I mean, after all, Eisenhower and especially John Kennedy tried really hard to murder Fidel Castro, lots of times. They tried to poison his food. They smuggled in cigars laced with deadly toxins. They gave an agent a ballpoint pen with a poison needle to jab him. These were all launched, and more plots didn't even make it out of the lab, like an exploding seashell and a poisoned wetsuit. But while it may be tricky to kill a protected enemy, it's not that hard. Just look at Israel, which has made assassination a central part of its counterterrorism strategy. They've used exploding phones, poison medication, car bombs, booby-trapped hotel rooms, airstrikes, snipers. When they took out an Iranian nuclear scientist, the Mossad set up a machine gun in a parked truck. They controlled it 1,000 miles away from Israel, and it also used AI facial recognition to identify him as he drove away. It fired 13 rounds in seconds, accurate enough to kill him but not harm his wife, who was sitting next to him. And then it self-destructed. So where there's a will, there's a way. The third reason given is another with some truth: it might backfire. I mean, a 19-year-old kid shot a politician and started World War I, which led to the deaths of 20 million people. And power vacuums are completely unpredictable. In North Korea, for instance, if Kim Jong-un were taken out, he'd probably be replaced by his sister, who may very well be smarter and meaner than him. You don't always get peace after killing someone. Sometimes you get something worse. But again, this logic falls in on itself because military operations backfire too, often far worse. In my lifetime, Vietnam didn't work out too well for the US. And more recently, Iraq again, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. I mean, the United States has killed a lot of people in the Mideast, and that's not quite a peaceful area yet. So if the official answers we've been given don't completely add up, what might be going on? So many years ago, I saw a picture of George Bush and Hillary Clinton that looked like there was a real friendship between them, which I found interesting considering how at odds they were politically. I mentioned it to my boss at the time. He was a very powerful and connected man who told me basically, of course they're friends. They and their families run the country and the world, and that's a small club. So could that be the answer here? That a quiet club of global leaders don't want to normalize political assassinations because they'd be setting up a precedent that could kill them? Could the taboo against political assassination be less about morality and geopolitical strategy and more about the survival of the elite political class? If that's the case, for American presidents, it's working pretty well. I mean, the presidency is a very dangerous job, and essentially every president has had assassination attempts against him. 4 presidents, which is 9%, have been shot to death: Abraham Lincoln, James Garfield, William McKinley, and John F. Kennedy. But in all of American history, we don't have one known instance of a foreign power trying to kill the president, ever. Now, I need to add an asterisk to that one because in recent years, foreign governments have actually tried to kill 2 former presidents. I'll get into that, and I'll also let you know what I learned about the modern-day rules of political assassinations, and a big reason why those rules might be completely changing. Hey, this is a good time to say that I link to my writing notes and sources in the description box. If I make a mistake, which I sometimes do, I'll address it in a pinned comment below. Okay, so to understand where we are, it often makes sense to figure out how we got to this point. So I started researching about assassinations throughout history, and it's a long history. The men in charge of things have been murdering people to stay in power since before humans knew how to write down things. The history they teach us in school is pretty boring, but the history of humans is a murder fest just as dramatic as anything you can see on TV. So the taboo against political assassination didn't exist for most of history. It only started taking shape in the 1700s, 1800s, as powerful countries tried to civilize warfare with diplomatic rules. They still killed their enemies, but the murder part of the game got quieter. But always, even to this day, dictators routinely killed their internal enemies. That's one of the modern rules I'll get to in a bit. By the time World War II came around, political assassinations, even in the midst of war, were pretty rare. Now, part of that was logistics. In the midst of a war, it's hard to both gather intelligence and then get to an enemy leader. But 2 incidents deserve a mention. One was an American plan to kill Japanese Admiral Yamamoto, who'd masterminded the Pearl Harbor attack. US codebreakers got lucky. They discovered Yamamoto's exact flight plan that he was taking in the Solomon Islands on a trip. President Roosevelt gave the green light and sent 18 P-38 fighters over 400 miles to take him out. And they did. It was a strategic and psychological blow to the Japanese. On the other side of the world, the Brits had a different experience in 1944 when they had the chance to kill Adolf Hitler in the middle of the war. Their intelligence had learned that every morning at his Bavarian mountain retreat, Hitler took the same walk at the same time, with minimal security. They trained a German-speaking sniper and made up a uniform of a German mountain trooper. Everything was ready to go until they changed their minds. They evidently had concerns that Hitler would become a martyr and that Germany might fight harder, perhaps under a smarter tactical leader, like a Himmler or a Göring. But there was also a general squeamishness about the optics and morality of deception and disguise. In the years after the war, as the United States and Soviets faced off in the Cold War, the US wasn't above murdering local leaders. In 1960, President Eisenhower had the CIA ship poisoned toothpaste to kill the Prime Minister of Congo, but local rivals got to him first. I mentioned Fidel Castro, and the CIA was also involved to some extent in the killing of the dictator of the Dominican Republic, and also Che Guevara, and a Chilean general, and arguably the Chilean president. Years later, when those became public, along with a lot of other CIA shenanigans, there was a PR blowback, leading to increased oversight, reforms, and the executive order against assassination that I mentioned before. President Reagan, though, did come close to that line in 1986. When Libyan agents blew up a Berlin nightclub and killed American soldiers, Reagan ordered airstrikes on both military targets and Gaddafi's residential compound. Reagan never admitted it was an assassination attempt, but it sure looked like one. And afterwards, Gaddafi behaved himself for quite a while. The modern rules of assassination aren't written down anywhere, but every major country seems to understand them. But they're different depending on who's doing the killing. The biggest difference? Democracies and dictatorships play by different rules. The main difference? Dictatorships kill internal targets, and in many of them, assassination is standard operating procedure. Here's a sample.
A U.S. official told CBS News they believe the crash was caused by an explosion, possibly a bomb.
That plane held Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group. He was one of Vladimir Putin's top military men until he led a mutiny against Putin, which obviously didn't go well. Putin routinely murders his opponents. They're shot or thrown out of windows or knocked off in other ways. He killed this critic with radioactive polonium, which left little doubt who was behind it. Maybe the only more creative murderer in the world is the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. In 2017, he killed his half-brother in a Malaysian airport by 2 women who smeared VX nerve agent on his face. Just a few years earlier, he blew apart his uncle with anti-aircraft guns in front of an audience. Democracies, on the other hand, they like to claim the moral high ground. And for the most part, they avoid killing foreign heads of states or government officials altogether. But they have found one group that's politically and legally safe to target: terrorists. After 9/11, the Bush administration opened the door to targeted killings in a big way. Drone strikes, special ops, raids, covert hits. The door never closed. Under Obama, the U.S. launched more than 500 drone strikes, killing over 3,000 people, most linked to al-Qaeda. People are generally fine with those killings. After all, with terrorists, there's really no country to go to war with. But people do get squeamish when bystanders die, which often happens when you blow people up. That's why America developed a version of the Hellfire missile, nicknamed the Ninja Bomb. It doesn't even have an explosive warhead. It uses swords. When the United States took out al-Zawahiri, Osama bin Laden's successor, he was standing on a balcony in Afghanistan. Before the missile hit him, 6 blades opened up, tearing him apart. No one else was hurt, no other buildings were damaged, just pieces of him on the patio. And look, the United States and Israel aren't alone in this. Russia, France, Turkey, Iran, India, they all use targeted killings against terrorists. So that's the real norm right now. Terrorists are fair game, political leaders aren't. Only a few have crossed that line, and one paid with his life. Years after the first Gulf War had ended, Saddam Hussein tried to kill then-retired President Bush during a visit to Kuwait. Saddam's agent packed a 200-pound bomb in a Toyota Land Cruiser to blow up the former president, but were caught by the Kuwaitis just in time. Then President Clinton fired missiles in retaliation at the Iraqi intelligence headquarters, but Saddam's real bad luck came shortly afterwards because the next president would be George Bush's son, also named George Bush. U.S. authorities never said if that assassination attempt helped spur the Second Gulf War, but it's certainly possible that had Saddam not tried that, he would have lived out his days in one of his many palaces instead of swinging from a rope. Because that's the unspoken pact among world leaders. We don't kill each other. It's conceivable that's not a moral line, but a self-preservation of the ruling class. Assassinating a top government official breaks that system, which is why, for nearly 80 years, the United States and nearly everyone else has avoided it. That is, until 2020, when Donald Trump did exactly that. For the first time since Yamamoto, the United States directly and openly killed the top-ranking official of a foreign government. General Qasem Soleimani was arguably the second most powerful man in Iraq. For years, Soleimani had directed Iran's proxy wars against the Middle East and was linked to the death of hundreds of Americans in Iraq, and he was still doing it. For 2 decades, he led the Quds Force, essentially a terror network disguised as a military unit. He was considered untouchable. In late December of 2019, militias backed by Iran fired rockets at a U.S. base in northern Iraq, killing an American. Then, 4 days later, on Christmas, they attacked the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. 4 days after that, Soleimani was in Iraq as well. He and his entourage had just landed at the Baghdad airport and were leaving in a 3-car convoy. A few minutes later, a U.S. Reaper drone locked on and fired Hellfire missiles. Nothing was left but charred steel and DNA of Soleimani and his group, which included another top Iraqi commander. Trump didn't deny it. Hell, he tweeted about it, posting an American flag on Twitter before going on television to talk about it. Iran promised revenge and later launched dozens of ballistic missiles at 2 U.S. bases in Iraq. No one was killed, but some service members were injured. The Iranians later released a video showing a drone's crosshair targeting Trump at Mar-a-Lago, but they didn't take any further action until 2024. When Trump was out of power, they went further and tried to kill him. The Department of Justice filed charges claiming Iran's Revolutionary Guard had orchestrated a murder-for-hire plot to kill Trump and 2 other former U.S. officials. The orders were clear. He was the top priority, and they told their operative, money's not an issue. 3 men are awaiting trial, and one's believed to still be in Iran. So the hit never happened, but the stakes were raised, and how this one ends is still up in the air. Which leads me to my final point. It's becoming easier than ever to assassinate people. In World War II, without a lucky break, it was hard. Sneaking an agent behind enemy lines or bombing an area where you thought someone might be. But technology, especially targeted missile and drone technology, is becoming cheaper and more widespread. In the Gulf War, the US could target a building with a missile. Now, a drone, not much bigger than this one, can be fit with an explosive device meant for killing one person. The Ukrainians are killing a lot of Russians with inexpensive drones, and it's just going to become more commonplace. AI drones can even identify individuals, and they even have some that will lie in wait outside of a door or a building for the target to come out. It's reasonable to think that in the near future, being a military or political leader will become more dangerous than ever. So as I mentioned earlier, 9% of US presidents have been assassinated. And it got me thinking, what are the odds that a US president, like Donald Trump, will physically survive the job? He's also almost 80 years old, which isn't young. I dug into some of the actuarial tables and other research to see what the statistics actually show, and you may find it interesting. Hey, I hope this video gave you something interesting to think about. If it did, come back again. Thanks for watching.